This is the Crucible, the JRTC experience.
Hey, click to my position over.
This is where we discuss warfighting skills and lessons learned in a decisive action training environment for large-scale combat operations at JRTC.
Hi, I'm Colonel Matt Hardman, the Commander of Operations Group here at the Joint Readiness Training Center, and thanks for joining us for another episode of the Crucible, the JRTC experience. And so, one of the things about being the Commander of Operations Group is, I get to do cool stuff, and I'm very fortunate today to have one of my all-time heroes, phenomenal officer, leader, Lieutenant Colonel Dave Beskow, here on the ground with us. We were fortunate he's been here for the last couple days. Looking at JRTC and sort of what we do, and really a unique skill set that he brings. And so I'm going to let him introduce himself and tell us a little bit about himself.
All right. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Dave Beskow, currently serving at United States Military Academy right now as an academy professor. My journey to there started as a cadet there. I attended there and graduated in 2001, 3 months before the towers came down, and spent most of my career in the War on Terror. I branched into the infantry, went to Ranger School, and immediately went to the 82nd Airborne Division.
Well, hold on. You didn't immediately go. How long did you spend in Ranger School?
Some people go, people ask what, are you a summer ranger or winter ranger? I tell them I'm a winter, spring, summer ranger. I spent a while there.
Right.
So,
and no, I just say that because, people at our age, folks look at us sometimes and are like, oh, they pull them right out of the box and everything went perfect. So like a good infantry leader, you soldiered through a fair bit of adversity to graduate.
I did. Didn't quit. Made it there. Same tab, but I spent a long time there and learned a ton. It's a great school. You learn a lot about yourself and about the Army too. So
okay, all right. And then you showed up at the 82nd.
I showed up at the 82nd, shaved with the Rangers school cut, and showed up at 2 Panther there at the 82nd, where we crossed paths at early in our careers.
Yeah.
From there, I served as a rifle platoon leader, rifle XO, HHC XO, and then went on to the Captain's Career Course that back down at Benning at the time, now Fort Moore. Following the career course, I had a chance to go teach at IBOLC and did 5 iterations of IBOLC, 17-week POI there. Phenomenal junior infantry officers coming through there, and had a blast training them and launched them out to the Army. Following that, I went to 4th Infantry Division, almost immediately deployed and took command in combat in East Baghdad with 166 Armor. Spent most of my command time there in East Baghdad. Afterwards, the Army, back then there was no VTIP. There was a board that would occur and choose where your future would go, and I got selected to go into the Operations Research, or ORCEN FA49. I've spent the last 10 years in that functional area. I spent, after getting a master's degree at Naval Postgraduate School, I went to West Point, taught there in the Department of Systems Engineering for 4 years. From there, the rest of my career has primarily been doing data science for intelligence, cyber, and SOF. So I went immediately to be one of the first data science or ORCEs assigned to the Intelligence and Security Command. We try to figure out where does data fit in intel across our ends, and had a great time with some great folks there at the Intelligence and Security Command from 2015 to 2017.
And you'd tell me about it, but then you'd have to kill me.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. I was selected to go to a PhD program, did that from 2017 to 2020. I did a PhD at Carnegie Mellon University, focused on machine learning and AI for information warfare. Following that, I was pulled down to Army Cyber Command and stood up some of their enterprise data science cell and DevSecOps team. I had a blast doing it with some of the smartest Americans I think I've ever met. And now I've returned to West Point, where I'm serving the Department of Systems Engineering. I'm currently Director of Operations Research Center, and so I'm really doing reimbursable research for a bunch of different DoD and Army entities, and so it's great to work Army problems across our force and help use the data to kind of solve those.
Okay, so kind of first thing that stands out to me is it terrifies me that you've been somewhere where you met people that were like way smarter than you. or the smartest people you've met in the Army, because A, I consider you to be one of the smartest people I know. So that means like there's a lot more out there. And B, you know, we got the opportunity to serve with, you know, with Mike, who's hands down like moves objects with his mind, like,
that's right.
You know, the professor, your first company commander, you know, one of the smartest guys I've ever met. So it's scary that, you know, there's bigger bosses out there apparently, and it's pretty impressive. Hey, so, you know, I want to talk a little bit about some leader stuff here in a minute, but before we do that, and you know, I think my 15-year-old son asked you this up front, and I think it's useful. What is machine learning? Right? I mean, people say these things, right? And, and these things get thrown out. Like, what is that? As somebody that actually has a PhD in it, what is machine learning?
Yeah, great question. Really, first, there's a variety of machine learning and AI. So there's a big umbrella that a lot of things fit under there, and with some people are talking about one aspect of it and the other. So in general, though, machine learning is looking at lots and lots of data and finding patterns in that and helping to understand those patterns and potentially using them to either predict or classify things. But it's really helping to understand those patterns in data in ways that potentially a human couldn't do because of the scale of the data. So really, it's not like going to take over the world necessarily. We're not there to Skynet yet. We're not to, you know, that
so
type
first thing we do is make like denials, right? So, you know, I saw your coffee cup, and apparently it is with Skynet. So you don't work for Skynet.
No.
Okay. So
in general, it's pattern recognition
analysis.
And understanding those patterns in a way that at a scale that, you know, a computer can do, and it's sometimes hard to do, you know, for humans to do that at that scale and that ability. So, for example, in my PhD, we worked at how do we find bots on Twitter using lots of different features. So there's things about bots that are different than humans, and if we look at a bunch of different features of accounts, how do we find those?
You know, one of the things that we preach here is be humble. What truly is a bot?
A bot is a computer doing actions that are somewhat human looking. So it's trying to imitate human actions. And then in social media, that's a computer doing actions that typically are done by a human. Now, sometimes bots are very, very useful. They can push out, you know, national, if there's an emergency, natural disaster. Most of your social media, your media companies, so New York Times, that's probably a bot pushing their news articles and just grabbing from somewhere. But some of them can become more devious, and it's really just, though, at the bottom line, it's a computer doing something that's generally done by a human being. Yes.
Okay. All right. Now, taking me in my crash course education here, how does artificial intelligence fit within that? Is that like a subset of machine learning, or?
Artificial intelligence is this bigger umbrella. Machine learning is an aspect under it. There's a bunch of other things that come together to create what we call artificial intelligence. So sometimes as we move to something moving autonomously from an autonomous car, you know, it's bringing in a bunch of different things. Part of that system is machine learning, but there's other things creating the autonomy of an autonomous car beyond just machine learning. But the AI umbrella is the bigger umbrella, that machine learning is an aspect of that, of under that umbrella.
Okay. Well, that's helpful as I get, you know, beginning to learn, and you know, we're going to talk about this a little bit more, you know, of how do we gain, you know, education in this. But you kind of started, you know, at the beginning of this when you did your introduction, and I'd also, you know, you got an amazing family, which is, I think, pretty cool. You know, you didn't talk about up there at West Point, living with you, Naomi, and 6 awesome kids, living a great life, and a wonderful Army family. But, you know, your journey in the Army, you know, brought you to 2505, and you served in 2505, first as a rifle platoon leader, went forward to Afghanistan.
Yes, sir.
Right? And doing amazing things with the Houdinis in that platoon. And then you became the company XO in Afghanistan, you know, transition there. And well, I'll say it politely, I asked you to jump a Steiner aid when we got back, and, you know, resulted in you breaking your femur on Sicily drop zone.
It was, sir.
And so I'm gonna talk a little bit about you, just because I think it's important. I always think it's neat kind of sharing people's stories. So, you know, Dave here broke his femur pretty bad, and he was going to set up at the assembly area. And so I got the opportunity to start receiving reports from him after he regained consciousness, was put on a Skedco, put his radio into operation, and was reporting the people with him while being dragged to the CCP, and then reporting people at the CCP to us, so we had accountability of folks. And so, you know, one of those folks from everything you could ask from an infantry leader in terms of duty and sense of responsibility. And I don't want to make them blush too much, but about 90 days after that jump, I think you were just had done surgery on crutches. We get alerted to go to Iraq, and then Lieutenant Beskow crutched over to the battalion headquarters, propped his crutches up on the wall outside of Lieutenant Colonel at the time, Bruce Parker's door, went into 2 Panther 6's office, reported and said, "Hey, sir, don't leave me behind. I want to go with my company." And I'll try not to have my voice break too much on this, but I don't know if I've ever, you know, just the sense of loyalty, first and foremost, to your teammates and the soldiers that we were leading there together, and blessed to get a lead. You know, that set the bar from a duty standpoint for me in my career of what right looks like, and we're only blessed to get to have, you know, subordinates so much better than us, and I was fortunate to have it. And then, you know, today's the 20th anniversary of a really tough day that you and I shared together, losing 3 paratroopers in Iraq, Luke James, Buddy Kenny, and Corey Marachek, and having, you know, a couple others get seriously wounded. And, you know, fortuitous that we get to be together on this day, but I've been forever grateful for your leadership and the way you led. And, you know, and coming out of that experience, and you did hard things on that deployment, you did hard things as an HACXO, but then you go to be an IBOLC instructor. And what years were you an IBOLC instructor? 2006 and 7. Yeah. So those of us that have gray hair, remember, those are some of the hardest days in our Army during GWAT. And, you know, we're going to talk about data science, but, you know, that perspective of, you know, the Army at that point was at about 525,000. Brigades are turning every 12 months to go back to the fight. At that point, even, we had some folks that were doing their 3rd deployment. And you're preparing young second lieutenants to go lead platoons in harm's way, not just harm's way, really hard times, particularly in Iraq, but also in Afghanistan. What was that like for you? I mean, you'd done it as a platoon leader. You'd seen it, obviously, you know, tragedy up close as a company XO. What was that like for you doing that for young leaders?
So it was great as a platoon trainer. It was just myself and an E7 that would train 40 to 48 young infantry officers. And we would get to know them over 17 weeks. By the time at the end of that, you could pick any one of those 48 out through nods at night, and you knew who it was. So you knew them well. And then you were going to launch them. We knew we were going to launch them right over the pond into the fight. And we would get the notices back that on their first mission, they're sprinting across streets, dancing around with bullets hitting up. So what we were doing there in the school was absolutely relevant to what they were doing, how they were leading. We could think of the magnitude of the number of soldiers that each of those lieutenants were leading as they did, both in the all compos too, right? So from the guard to the reserve, you know, to mainly guard and active, they were launching over and leading young Americans in very tough circumstances.
Right away. Yeah.
Right away. And so we would bring the letters back and bring them into the classroom of here's what the folks are seeing, here's what they're doing, here's how they're leading at that level. And it was a cycle. You know, we were getting feedback right away, not from, you know, unfortunately we a lot of times didn't have a chance to come to a place like this. They were doing a few things home station, and then launching over into the box, the real box.
Yeah. And then, you know, from that experience, which must have kind of weighed, you know, given given what we were doing in 2006 and 7, and knowing, because you'd seen it, you just come from doing it yourself, of what we're going to be asking them to do. That must have been a burden, but at the same time, then you finish that experience and you go pretty much immediately into company command in Iraq. What was that like for you?
It was so once you're back in, you go back and deploy again. And the first convoy you get back over there, like, all right, we're back in it. We're changing the mindset, and we're back in the game here. And then I took command in combat and led a company for 9 months in 166 Armor there in East Baghdad. So it was a different thing taking command in combat, where I didn't have a chance to train them. I didn't have a chance. What we had is what we were rolling with. It was a large combat team. I had 2.5 mech platoons, 1 or 2 armor platoons, and the mortar platoon were on my task force. And we were spread out, most of us on East Baghdad. My XO and part of the team was on West Baghdad. And so trying to command and control that, taking over in a very, very tough area, it was challenging. 2 of my lieutenants I trained them, so I couldn't blame anyone else but myself.
But yourself, yeah.
So, or you're training the platoon next to me. One I trained, one trained by a peer of mine. So these people I knew, some great leadership there. At the time, it was Lieutenant Colonel Scott McKean, now Lieutenant General Scott McKean. Great leadership there in a very tough area. The battle space I took over, we hadn't really entered. Right as I took over, Colonel McKean set the shaping conditions, and we entered and had boots on the ground, and now we just had to maintain security, build economics, and start working with the folks there.
Yeah. So. And this idea of mindset, I mean, because I know your background, that's a hard thing you knew what you were going into in 2007, 8. When we went to Afghanistan in 2003, we didn't. We didn't. And I think that's like one of the really important things here is that, over time, generationally, like most of our Army hasn't deployed. And the things that we were doing in Iraq and Afghanistan are not the things that we think we might be called upon to do going forward. And, the clock's running. And being in the mindset to be ready to do really hard things in difficult circumstances, is a challenge for sure. And the experience, of coaching and teaching at IBOLC, how do you think that prepared you as a commander?
One, we were focused on the basics. We just focused on the basics over and over and over again.
Yeah, speaking my love language.
And I'll be honest, it was the best training I've ever done. Just because we kept getting into rotations, we didn't oftentimes have a chance because we were, trying to reset families, right? Reset a whole bunch of things, reset units. So the best training, honestly, did because you'd go straight into the full roll up all 17 weeks, go from IMT through platoon live fire and everything in between. We did it every time, and so to be able to watch the basics and watch what was successful, and then try to set those standards of discipline when we came in of doing the basics over and over and over again was critical. Yeah.
And repetition is absolutely a gift, and we certainly got to see that with the professor as well as with Sergeant Major Knowles. Okay, hey, I appreciate you talking about that part of your career, but now you're doing things for the Army that are pretty amazing. By reputation, as I've talked to other people, and then spending some time talking to you. What I would ask is, you reached out and said you wanted to come down here based on some of the things that the Army's asking you to take a look at. Like, what are your impressions as a data scientist, as an ORCA, looking at JRTC and what we can learn here?
Yes, sir. Well, right now, our leaders at the highest level of the Army are really looking at how do we become more data-enabled, how do we use data better in the Army across it. We're trying to leverage machine learning and AI better, and all of the machine learning and AI is very data-hungry. And so we're trying to see if we have the right systems and data, and where is our data in the Army we can leverage for a variety of things. And so I really came here to see what's what I'm calling the data exhaust, or what is the data that's being produced at our CTCs that could be of value, both here in the environment, in this Crucible experience, how are we using that data? And then how do we use that data better for other things, from acquisition to building machine learning and AI to understanding human performance? How do we better use that data? Not changing the Crucible experience, but to try to get that data exhaust. The data is already being produced. We just need to plug something in, capture it, and put it into the right place with the right folks to get after some of these questions that we have. And so that's where we're here. It's been a phenomenal time on the ground here. There's a lot. There's a ton of gold here, data gold sitting here at this place that I think is extremely valuable, and I think we're using it to a great extent here, and I think we can also start using it for a variety of other things now.
Yeah, and it's been awesome having you here, and just the questions that you've had and the ideas, back and forth. We do use a lot of it as we build after action reviews, but frankly, I think we acknowledge on this end that there's more we can be doing, not just for here, but to your point of enabling the Army. What are kind of some of your ideas, as we look at like human performance, for example? Like what are, we've got an initiative going forward. We got some great support from the Ranger Regiment, and we did a pilot of gathering some human performance metrics, particularly tied to sleep, that now we're going to program in going forward. But what are your thoughts of opportunities that we got to explore?
Yeah, on human performance, one is just as we build these sensors, sometimes the initial things will come into the AI, but let's grab the data, because there's some long-term, longitudinal things that we can measure if we can set the data aside and looking at longitudinally over time. So we're going to try to do that, I think. The other things is human performance. Is just a number of things that we have, the ORCENs have to build for modeling and sim to help inform what the next future Army looks like, or potentially how do we use current plans and how will they happen. And there's certain questions people have of how often does a tactical formation move from A to B of this size in this place. Sometimes there's people, honestly, that are doing a little bit of this, they're just putting their finger in the air to try to guess those. Rather than guessing those, let's do it over lots of iterations in pretty standard terrain here of, what are those things about human performance or organizational performance over time, and then how do we bring these into these modeling and sim that are informing decisions for our senior leaders. And let's get those numbers right. And if we can just measure it from data we're already producing, let's not go set up a whole number test in center to figure out what that number is. Yeah.
So, if nothing else, it can help us. I think it can do more than that, but it can help us hone the hypothesis to then, instead of testing, 10 hypotheses, we're really testing 2 from a resource standpoint. As you look at, you got the opportunity to spend some time with Geronimo down here, and contrary to popular belief, they do not cheat. What are your kind of thoughts on what they're doing now, and where do you see the opportunity for them going forward?
Really, the phenomenal thing I think about Geronimo is they're a small unit that can iterate and innovate very, very quickly. They're driven to. They have young leaders who want to win, and that drives them to innovate against our forces in ways that we need to learn. From our senior leaders from across the thing should come kind of take a look at what they're doing. It sounds like we had the chief of staff here last week and got to see and was impressed with what they're doing. But particularly in some of the technology, they're grabbing off-the-shelf technology, bringing it into the box, and having phenomenal effects against our forces. And I think that's something that we need to continue to learn about, to watch, and to resource to be able to continue to do that.
Yeah, and I think the advantage they have over the rotational unit with this, the biggest one is they get to do it over and over again. So, they're not doing it once, they're doing it multiple times, and if it doesn't work, that's okay, because this isn't their readiness training event. But when it works, then they can validate it over and over again going forward, which is clearly kind of what they've done with some of the small UAS. And, I think one of the things that, General George was happy about when he came here is that, we're we don't have it in our lock and key. Like, we're intentionally sharing it with rotational units. We've had a Gainey company from the 82nd come here, 3rd Infantry Divisions come here and fought with Geronimo and employed a lot of their teams to get best practices, and then the Ranger Regiment as well. And the idea is that we're taking what's happening here, and then we're spinning that back into units as quickly as possible. So if a unit has an idea of something they want to do, we can validate it here because we can do it 3 rotations back to back and tell them whether or not it's going to work.
Yes, sir.
What about from, where do you see the opportunities with Geronimo when it comes to like machine learning and some of the things that they can do to enable?
What's really interesting is they are bringing, so here at JRTC, they're fully building out the information environment. And even right now, they're leveraging these new large language models to be able to generate this information, to be able to scale propaganda into this scenario, this synthetic scenario, but they're able to do it.
Yeah, we're LARPing here, live action role playing, right? So our LARPing environment.
But be able to do that with large language models is something a bunch of other organizations, from the 75th Innovation Unit to the AI Task Force, or which now is AI2C or AI Integration Center, to others, are trying to play with and do that. And you're putting it into this environment and watching how it has effects. I think there's a bunch of things we need to do. So you're already leaning forward in this new AI realm. We've come in with the large language models, and I think it's neat to see that happen here. And I think there's others that we need to collaborate with and bring in to come watch this.
Yeah, I think, one of the, when my commander, Joel Gardner, came in, and he'd former cock here, one of the areas that he asked us to take a look at is really the lack of depth and breadth in the information space and the information environment made it feel very stilted and fake. And so then it caused, what that does, frankly, is causes like staffs and leaders to not really pay too much attention to it because it doesn't really matter. And I think what the team has been able to do, and I think it's gaining traction and momentum, is to really build depth and breadth to this, so it matters, so the space matters, and clearly in the information operations, but also I think from an intel perspective, because I think we're able to build depth that we can seed in real intel, but with enough that we're actually playing Where's Waldo with some of this stuff to really rep out what we're doing from a collection standpoint. And so I'm excited of where this is going to be in 90 to 180 days, because it's moving at that kind of pace to enable it. And fortunately, we're getting a lot of support from other people to be able to do it.
So absolutely, it matters on the modern battlefield. We can see that, we know that. So how do we bring that here? And that's what we're working through there.
Yeah, and what's been cool for me to watch, and as I laid out up front, like a lot of this, I'm absolutely learning, and I think that that part of this is leaders is, it's there's a generational, in many respects, gap. It was interesting as I was talking with the Geronimo team. Much of my input about what I understand about some of the modern conflicts right now is very much coming from the intel community, coming from the Army enterprise, and I'm asking the junior folks, the warrant officers, the sergeants, the captains, well, where are you learning about what the enemy, our adversaries are doing out there? And they're like, oh, from watching TikTok, from following it on Twitter, which I think that's awesome, because we have this like top down and then bottom up, and we're really getting to see that meet in a place where they have a government purchase card and frankly an environment from the information space, the EW space, the airspace that allows them to go all out.
Yes, sir.
And then the other part of that that's been kind of cool is as they're doing that, it's causing them to really do this kind of OODA loop to think about, well, how would somebody do that to me in this action, reaction, counteraction, which is amazing to watch. And then as we get more rotational units that are taking us up on this partnership, spinning these back to the rotational unit to then have the rotational use these capabilities back on Geronimo to then Geronimo develop and employ countermeasures to that is really speeding up what we're doing here.
Is it?
Hey, another thing that you brought up, and we were kind of talking about this after the after action review, and this rotation was a little bit different. The after action review is a little bit different, but sort of like and of course the numbers guy would say this. What's the scoreboard? As you look at this, like what are the metrics that you think about when really looking at success or failure with tactical units? I mean, at the root of what we do, combat, there are winners and losers in combat, and there are consequences for losing, right? And some of that does have to get back to a scoreboard, to metrics. We're the Joint Readiness Training Center, not the Joint Readiness Testing Center. But at the end of the day, the ultimate test is combat. What are some of your thoughts on that?
Well, first I got to say it's not all science. This is an art and a science. There's a bunch of art. I mean, war is a bunch of art, but there's a little bit of science. There's for sure a number of numbers. There's a bunch of data. Even here, it sounds like there's terabytes of data being produced. So being here is something to just start thinking about what are the metrics, what are the things that we need to evaluate what success looks like, what both to understand the unit here and then to understand their performance here. And so even from thinking through there's some easy ones. The low-hanging fruit is the ones that everyone's counting. So what is the effects that you create, whether that's BDA, whether that's other things, and we can have some argument. I think a legitimate argument whether those are good metrics or not. I think there's an argument there, but there's some easy ones as far as BDA, who can create the greatest effects with the least cost. I think there's also something to the effect of how can you create the greatest effect at the least cost with the least communication, because a well-oiled machine just kind of works. You don't have to chatter a whole bunch to get there. So who can create the greatest effect at the least cost with the lowest chatter?
Yeah, I have a hypothesis on that. I think you're right. I mean, everything that you kind of laid out is right, and I think so. An interesting, some folks listening out there would say if you're gathering all this data, like we're judging units, and I would say I'm a historian. We don't judge. We seek to understand, right? I want the primary source so I understand what really happened and why, causal relationships over time, and as you were kind of saying this, I'm thinking about the things that I was doing as a battalion commander, the things I was doing as a brigade commander. I was largely doing those things based first and foremost on what I'd been taught in professional military education, and then second of just what I'd seen. By experience, having been a company commander and a field grade and all these things, but that sample size is actually relatively small. I mean, my sample size is probably bigger than most based on my time serving at CTCs. But even then, it's inadequate. It's a small sample size. And so, the heuristics that I bring to kind of judge what we're doing, they may be off and unknowingly off. And so, but if you can look at 100 battalions over multiple years of rotations, you may learn things about what we're doing that are really agnostic of individuals, but have to do with the way that we've developed our doctrine, the way that we teach this in PME, that are from all great people, but are incapable of that scale to see the sample size that really that help us see things and look at things maybe in new or at least nuanced ways.
Yes, sir. I mean, even just today as a thing, and I think one of the things that could impact performance here is, if you think of leadership as building a team and being its compass, part of the impact is how long someone has to build a team. I had to take command in combat. We just talked about that. I didn't have a whole lot. I didn't have a chance to really build that. So how does the amount of time we give to build teams? So if you look at, for example, units coming in and compare how they do when you look at how long have they had that team? What's the average or the mean, median, whatever you want to do, of the number of months that those soldiers have been on the ground together? How long have they been in the unit? How long have they been in that job? And how does something like that impact their performance? Those are things that are critical for us to understand how we manage our enterprise, how do we manage our units.
Right. I mean, there's there's probably a, like, for lack of a better term, a price point, right? Of, you know, I have a squad leader. As long as I have a squad leader in position and they got 2 live fires and I have them in position for 36 or 42 months, or that's the point where it has a compounding positive effect, not just at the squad level, but at the platoon and the company, and then, you know, we understand that those things all start to aggregate together. Yeah, I think that's a worthy thing to take a look at. You know, back to the, you know, how do you do this at the most effectiveness, with efficiency at the lowest cost possible, and do it with as little chatter? You know, my hypothesis would be is like it's detailed graphic control measures. If I have detailed graphic control measures and I execute a rehearsal, I don't have to. I can do this without keying a hand mic. If I had to, maybe, and there's probably an amount of communication that increases performance, but at some point it probably has a diminishing return or even a counterproductive result. And you know, I believe that. I mean, haven't seen it. That's my gut. I believe that to be true. And one of the things that we've challenged Geronimo to do here is to fight comms blacked out.
Wow.
To fight comms blacked out, to fight comms blacked out in Windows, which has been interesting. You know, we do it about once a rotation, and we're trying to iterate forward with that, because I think if they can do that, it breeds a degree of confidence. And frankly, you know, I think that will make adversaries out there very uncomfortable if we're able to do this in windows of time, comms blacked out or limited, how we do it. So
was that a wake-up call the first time they did it?
So the first time they did it, it was really uncomfortable. And they didn't really have success or failure, but it was uncomfortable. But you know, the cool thing is they went back, and 4 or 5 days later they repped it out again, and not surprisingly, like, all the junior leaders like, well, we need to do this and we need to do this, and here's the way to improve it. And people then really valued the graphic control measures, and they really valued the rehearsals that they were executing. And then I also think it drove simplicity in SOPs. And then they were able to do it pretty effectively. And so we've had companies that have executed infiltrations and raids, dismounted, staying completely comms blacked out, really until they hit the assault position to initiate fires. But also have done that without, you know, really breaking, emitting by executing based off of time off target, which requires different, more tolerance, frankly, in the timelines of what they're trying to do.
Now, is the RTU required to do that, or have you seen anyone voluntarily do that?
No. Well, no, that's not true. We've seen a couple battalions that have done night infiltrations that have, once they've crossed the line of departure, have deliberately cut emissions for window of time, and they have picked up in the assault position emitting. But that takes a ton of discipline. It takes stripping away from having the Garmin watches and the Garmin GPS. It takes really detailed pre-combat inspections. It takes a very simple, detailed plan that's been rehearsed to execute. And you know, in particular, I can think to one battalion that did it. And it was really cool because it made Geronimo lost track of them, because Geronimo's very comfortable collecting in certain ways.
The desired effect.
The desired effect. And once they lost track of that battalion, it actually caused Geronimo to have to kind of pull back, reassess, and adjust. And when that battalion essentially showed back up, it was absolutely at a position of disadvantage to Geronimo that caused Geronimo to displace out of their primary fighting position, the desired effect. But I think that, you know, it takes being brilliant at the basics to do that. My opinion is I think we're capable of doing it. I think it takes, and I think it has to be a tool that we have in the kit bag. You know, one, we want to reduce emissions, period, but it's probably not realistic to be completely blacked out all the time. But if you can go blacked out for windows, like you create a lot of uncertainty, I think, for your adversaries out there. And that's something that Geronimo is continuing to work at. I mean, I think the others, it gets to operate potentially in comms windows. And then how we push, depending on the transport and what we push. Are we doing that by voice? Are we doing it in data bursts that reduces our signature over time? But all of it gets to like really detailed, simple plans that have been well rehearsed.
Sure.
What are some of kind of the other Moneyball metrics from your perspective?
Well, I think eventually, I think to some extent, we need to think, do you need them by warfighting function? So now, I've had to count metrics for some warfighting functions, for example, intel, and there's pros and cons to doing it. It can create some undesired effects and other things potentially. So we just got to figure out, is there, so is it intel reports? So in the intel world, is it serialized reports? Is that that desired effect? Is that what we measure success? Is a number of those? And that's what we struggled with the intel world.
Right. Are we measuring performance or measuring effectiveness?
Yeah. But it's sometimes hard to, short of other ways to measure it, then that sometimes is the only way. Is it a proxy, or are we really measuring what we really want to do? Yeah. Sometimes it's a proxy, but that we just have to understand that. But I think across the warfighting functions, you think about fires. We talked about you sound like you had a challenging time in one of your things when it came to fires.
Oh yeah, as a battalion commander here, it was not awesome. And Ben Looper, if you're listening, it was not your fault. It was my fault. Yeah, it was my fault. Yeah, right. And I didn't understand the process. I mean, it's like back to the basics. I mean, I really didn't. I thought I did. It was humbling. It's interesting as you kind of reframe things. I think that that's part of obviously what we try to do here in the after action reviews is help people like really see kind of below the surface of what's actually really happening and what adds up, what's activity versus what's like effective. I mean, you can shoot a lot and it doesn't mean anything. And actually it's counterproductive because, you're exposing yourself versus, very prioritized, rehearsed plans that put a high volume of fire when and where you want it.
Yes, sir. Do you think it'd be valuable to a unit to know that they're in the 5th percentile for fires at that? So once you start collecting metrics, you can collect them over time, you can look at them, and the scenario probably changes a bit, but there's some things that are generally
Constants,
the same. So do you think coming to them after you build that and can say you're in the, if you're in the 50th, maybe that's okay, but do you think giving a unit, they're in the 5th percentile, in the 95th percentile for whether that's, fires or some other metric?
Yeah, I think it can be. I mean, I think context matters. An August rotation isn't the same as an April rotation. An August rotation, we've had a bunch of field grade transitions. We've had a bunch of other leader transitions. Back to kind of your comment about time and position and those things. You could have a brigade that's just come back from a 9-month deployment. And based on sort of other requirements in the Army, we're going to send them to a rotation, but they're really early in their training progression, and it may not be useful. You may have a brigade that understands that it has that problem, and I can tell them that, but they knew that they weren't good at this, and for whatever reason, and now, that the value is like, great, I told you before I came here I wasn't good at this, and now you're just telling me that I'm not good at this. And so kind of some of the art of coaching and teaching. But sometimes for others, I think it's, we've done this with command posts as we've really honed the way we track command post transitions, and we're starting to see units employing really the best practices that we've identified and that we're coaching, and those units that adopt those, I mean, they're able to transition a command post at the battalion level and then get to C2 in a battalion, and they can do that in 6 minutes. And if you told most people that, well, that's just not possible until you show them. And then when you show them and you say, okay, these are the things that units do, and this is how they set up, and it takes them anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour to do it. And then here's a video of a unit that's doing the things that we're coaching, and it takes them like less than 6 minutes, and they get to watch it on a video, and it's like, oh wow, this isn't made up. They're not giving me. It's not like my high school soccer coach, who used to tell us that we had to do these wind sprints and we had to do it in a certain amount of time, and he never actually started the clock, right? Like we're actually tracking it to help coach people with them to what's in the realm of possible. So I think there's value in it. I think again, the art is how we deliver it and employ it.
Yeah.
Because I think a good one is like processing times for fires. We want to. There's a lot of components that get into why does it take a long time to process a fire mission. What's in the realm of possible for that unit? There's an Army standard, but what's in the realm of possible for that unit based on their leader proficiency, their training proficiency, the C2 systems that they're actually using, right? I think that's helpful because then we can isolate within it the components that we can help coach and fix to get them faster and faster and more effective at what they do. So I think from a coaching perspective, at the end of the day, OCTs are really well-paid strength and conditioning coaches. Is kind of what we're trying to get at.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Hey, tactical leaders out there, I'm gonna flip this a little bit. What's the I've been serving in infantry units, and you went to Carnegie Mellon and got a PhD in machine learning. Like, what should leaders in our Army and preparing for the modern battlefield and large-scale combat operations, what should they be thinking about with data, and how should they educate themselves?
Great question. We've been trying to iterate on this. We were for a while on how do we bring data sciences? How do we create value with it? And we've slowly iterated. And I usually have one slide. I sit down with senior leaders and walk through how do we get value out of data. And there's 4 things that go into it to really get value out of it. One,
I'm writing this down.
One, this may seem pretty straightforward, but you have to have data. I can't get value with data without having data. And it may seem really intuitive, but there's so many times that I've been sent to solve problems with data and there's no data there. And so sometimes we have a misunderstanding of where the data really lies. There's also people think that there's certain things that we have access to as a U.S. government that we just do not have access to. Right. It's not whether we just don't have access for a variety of reasons, or maybe we don't have the authorities to have access to that data. And then even challenging in the tactical realm, there's challenges in getting data. So I've both peers of mine and I have worked on, for example, log cops. How do we automate a log cop to be able to bring in and show leaders at all levels up to the division level what what the log picture is for the formation on the ground? And it's the data scientists come in the back and it's like, the data is going to be really tough on this one. And every time it is, because we're not censoring we're not censoring magazines. There's not something in there that's bleeping back every time you fire.
The canteen doesn't have the meter on it.
Yeah,
it's
nor does your
Bluetooth enabled.
Nor does your water buffalo and the class 3 and your pallet of MREs. There's not something they're counting those. So
it's awesome that you're bringing that up, because this is one of the things that we see is like that data that we know we need. Is at the end of the day, it's got to be captured by human beings.
It is,
right. It's the ACE report. It's the log stat. It's the status card for the team leader and the squad leader. And you and I grew up in an Army where that was something that we actually did pretty well. That team leaders kept status cards and squad leaders kept status cards. And I tell this story of, when I was a support platoon leader, if you didn't turn in a log stat, or if that log stat was a copy and paste from the day before, you weren't getting food, right? And that's just how it worked, years ago. If we can't discipline ourselves at the most basic level to capture the data that we need to have an accurate picture of ourselves, regardless of the warfighting function, then we really can't do good analysis, period. If we capture it right now, most of this, just from a practical standpoint, has to be captured by human beings, which is doable because you and I have lived in an Army where we did that. Then there's the opportunity, frankly, with computing to do more with that data than we could in the past.
That's right.
And so we got to capture the data.
And we're not even to AI yet. We're just trying to show what you have on hand. And as you talk to senior leaders, there's a lot of tactical to operational decisions that are made based off of logistics.
Yeah.
They drive a lot of decision making. And so having that picture right. But once again, our back end, we design the greatest app in the world, but the back end of that at the tactical level has to be fed by disciplined tactical formations, feeding the back end. And it doesn't matter how well our front end looks.
Yeah.
You got to get.
And this isn't esoteric. This isn't just so that you can answer some great questions for a slide deck for senior leaders. Like, this is how we build a log cop and understand ourselves to plan realistically operations. And so this is a plea. Let's make, status cards awesome. Let's have platoon, squad, team status cards. Let's capture what we're doing so that, one, you have a good log cop and you can do good planning. And then two, I think what that will enable over time is we can build the systems that allow, maybe at the company level, certainly at the battalion, the brigade level, to analyze these things even more effectively and efficiently to better plan operations.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
So we need data.
We need data. That was one.
It needs to be digital.
Okay.
That may seem straightforward. I've worked with organizations before that have told me they had lots of data. When I showed up to get it, they rolled out the filing cabinet. Yeah. And I spent days there trying to turn a filing cabinet. So preferably
the files are in the computer.
That's preferably.
Right. All right. So, and very relevant to what we're talking about here at JRTC, it's going to be analog at the platoon level. It's going to be analog at the company level. At some point, we've got to transition it from analog to digital.
Right, sir.
And, whether some of those things by warfighting function maybe are happening at the battalion level, but certainly by the brigade level, they have to be transitioned from analog to digital.
Yes, sir. Okay.
And I think that's true for what I do or what we do. And I think that's certainly true listening to you to be able to solve big problems for the Army. We got to make that transition from analog to digital.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And if we can, as much as there's certain ways to bring the data, but we need data. We need a place to analyze the data. So we need platforms, and there's a whole movement to try to get the right platform. But there's a bunch of times where you have data without a platform to analyze it. So data, we need an environment or a data science platform to play with the data, and you need the talent. And we can, there's a bunch of argument of where should the talent be and what. I believe it should be, what branch or what functional area. I think we should try to put everyone, we all have data. We should all have data talent. We can figure out how to get there. But we need those three things of data, an environment to play with it, and talent to be able to work with that data. Now, you're not going to get, if you're missing any one of those, you're in some state of confusion, frustration, or other things.
Stages of grief.
Yes. All those need to come on top of a great question. And it's the great question. Really, the person who comes with the great question that's feasible, understanding the technology, is the innovator. And that may be the technologist, it may be the E3 on the ground, but you have to have a great question or it's simply academic. And so there's a lot of times when I go to organizations and I'm there and I'm just getting some sets and reps, and like, guys, when I showed up to Army Cyber Command to lead there, I started out with 8 lieutenants, a couple majors, and we just got set in the reps a little bit until we got to a great question. And so really, that's what we're looking for, is those great questions. And really the innovator is that person who can ask the great question.
That's a phenomenal answer. Okay, so let's talk about data education. So, what do leaders need to know? What should they be reading right now? What podcasts they should be listening to be better informed going forward? So first, I would say that the Cyber Center of Excellence just rolled out in November the Army's first information doctrinal manual. It's ADP 3-13 information. Highly recommend taking a look at the doctrinal way that we're approaching information in general. There's some different things that we have at the West Point. We have the Cyber Defense Review, which is a great look across information that really can tackle a bunch of different problems from policy through the technical
side. I think at the AI2C, which is the Army's integration, AI Integration Center under AFC. They're up at Carnegie Mellon. They have a whole cell up there. It's led by a tremendous peer of mine that I think that most of, Isaac Faber. He leads a bunch of dialogues on LinkedIn about this, both in general for anyone looking at information, but particularly for the Department of Defense. Highly recommend subscribing to him on LinkedIn. But those are the two things that come to mind initially.
Okay. And then just general literacy about data. What do you think?
So we've been rolling out from West Point in the math department what we call Data 101. They're doing a train the trainer this summer to try to bring folks in from commands and continue to do it. It's led by Colonel Nick Clark, came out of the South community, is now leading there, but highly recommend Data 101. Our department, my team right now is doing a Data 201, Data 301. It's not ready to scale right now, so I don't want to sell it too far, but we have been doing that. That was at the request of U.S. Army Pacific. We've been doing it there for their command across their staff, bringing in a number of folks to teach, to go beyond the Data 101, to look at additional things in both how do we think about problems, how do we think about data to get to that problem, and then how do we do some things in a staff to solve that.
I think that's awesome. I appreciate you sharing that. And as we talk about like the three pillars of leader development, the first one is what we do in the institutional Army, where you're at, and PME and these places, and the second is in the operational force of our jobs that we're in. And there's opportunities to do a lot of this, especially as you're talking about like the discipline of having the data and making that transition to digital. But then the last one is really like self-development. Like, how do we make ourselves better? And I mean, first and foremost, I think it starts with doctrine. So I appreciate you sharing that. I look forward to reading it. I got some time TDY here, and I think I'm going to do that. Okay. Hey, Lieutenant Colonel Beskow, this has been awesome. I appreciate your time. Obviously, way back machine for me, and getting to spend time with you. Kind of closing out, just kind of like your general thoughts on leadership, as we got a lot of great leaders out there listening.
No, it's been great, sir. It's been great to work with you. I heard once that leadership is to build a team and be its compass, and you've always built great teams and been their compass. I appreciate having a chance to do that. And as we close, I just want to ask you: you've been able to see leadership across a large slice of the Army as they come through here. They lead in this Crucible experience. What have you seen leads to success in that?
So I think the first thing. So thanks for the kind words, and humbling, but you and I were fortunate. I mean, we gotta come up around some amazing people, and I think back to Bravo Company 2505 and getting to transition with the professor and the way he treated me when I was on staff. From a development standpoint, he invested in me, even though I was going to take command from him in 18 to 24 months. And, I think culturally he was like way ahead of his time. But then the non-commissioned officers that we got to grow up around and with made a huge imprint on me, particularly with that emphasis on just being committed to the team and doing things to a high standard. What I would say up front is the kids are all right. I'm like, every now and again, I stand and yell, "Get off my grass." But the kids are all right. I mean, the young people that we have in our Army are absolutely phenomenal. Sometimes I look at them and, I realize I'm old because I don't understand what they're saying, or I don't understand, frankly, like why they look at it the way they do. But I go back to, not judging, but really seeking to understand. And, we've got the human capital we have in our Army is amazing. The young people we have, you got to spend some time with Geronimo. They are doing, they're just doing things that are unreal, and they're innovating at the speed of war. And what I've really appreciated is that I think they're incredibly coachable. They want to benefit from the experiences that we've had, but they're also going to apply those in new and different ways, which that's the whole point of what we're doing here. I think leaders in the Army, what I'm seeing is, I'll start like brigade commanders. I've been fortunate. Everybody that I've gotten to work with here, they want to win. They ferociously want to win, and because they want to win and they care more about winning than they do about their egos. When we tell them they should probably go deeper in their squat, they're going deeper in their squat. I mean, they want to win, and so they're open to winning, to learning. And the learning isn't the end. The learning is to enable the winning. And I think that that's like a hugely important kind of component of this. And every single brigade commander that I've gotten the privilege to do this with has been in that space. I think the to go up a level, I think right now, culturally in the Army, we're in a really good spot when it comes from, leadership or mentorship and development. People are investing. Sometimes I think one of the challenges is we're not explicit that that's what we're doing, that we're developing leaders. But I get to see it. I get to see it in division commanders and DCGOs. I get to see it in the Corps commander coming down here and truly taking time to develop people, me included. I see it in brigade commanders. I see brigade commanders investing in their time of subordinates and really helping them kind of grow. Like, this isn't the Joint Readiness Testing Center, and so people don't approach it that way, which I think is good. And I think that didn't happen yesterday, but it's been this very healthy progression in our Army going forward. And I think in that sort of vein, what I also think is, we got to help people recognize that these opportunities are fleeting, that we have to do this, and we got to make the most of them every time we're here, because a captain that's coming here is not just doing this to get their company ready for what we hope doesn't happen, but that we're imprinting experiences into them. We're expanding their sample size. So when they come back as a major, they're even better. And when they come back as a battalion commander, they're even better. And when they come back as a brigade commander, they're even better. And, Joan Beagle said this the other day, like, sorry, you can't steal this on a thumb drive, what we're doing here. This isn't, a database that you can steal. This is, you got to come here and you got to rep it out. And that's what our leaders right now are doing in the Army. And, we got to keep investing in that. And for the leaders that are out there, I'd tell you, you're coming to an environment that's going to allow you to learn and develop, not just for the thing that you're doing, but the thing you're going to do next. And what I've been fortunate to see, I had 4 phenomenal brigade field grades. Jim Lee, Kevin Bernhardt, Josh Sider, and Sean Cockrell. And all 4 of them were way better than I was as a brigade field grade. And that's a good thing. And I'm confident that they're going to be better battalion commanders than I was. And I'm confident that they're going to be better brigade commanders than I was. And I think that's the point. And so, part of it's like, trust the process. This thing works. If it was easy, everybody do it. All our adversaries out there would be doing this, but they're not. They're not doing this. They're not doing it the way we do it. And, I have great hope for the future, because I think we got great people. And I think they're really, really focused on war fighting. And, we just got to continue the path of doing that and being open to continuing to learn, to ask those great questions that you kind of talked about. So, hey, Dave, thanks for your time. As always, great to see you again, and look forward to continuing to serve with you. Thanks.
Thank you for joining us on The Crucible, the JRTC experience.
The Joint Readiness Training Center is the premier Crucible training experience. We prepare units to fight and win in the most complex environments against world-class opposing forces. We are America's leadership laboratory. Again, we'd like to thank our guests for participating. This podcast was created and produced by Mr. John Mabes. It was recorded and edited by Chief Thomas Rich and researched by First Lieutenant Anthony Cho. Intro vocals were done by Mr. Robert Chopper. Special thanks to Captain Jermaine Branch and Mr. Jeff England from Public Affairs. Be sure to like and follow us on social media to keep up with the latest warfighting TTPs learned through the Crucible that is the Joint Readiness Training Center. Follow us by going to https://linktr.ee/JRTC. We'd like to thank our partners at the Center for Army Lessons Learned of the Combined Arms Center, especially the JRTC Call Observations Detachment. Be sure to follow them on social media as well. Follow them at https://www.army.mil/call. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and review us wherever you listen or watch your podcasts, and be sure to stay tuned for more in the near future. The Crucible, the JRTC experience, is a product of the Joint Readiness Training Center.